High above the skies of India, on a calm November evening in 1996, hundreds of passengers were traveling on two separate flights, unaware that their journeys would soon converge in the most tragic way imaginable. What began as routine flights for Saudi Arabian Airlines and Kazakhstan Airlines turned into one of the deadliest mid-air collisions in aviation history. Miscommunication, confusion, and just a few critical seconds sealed their fate. I'm John, and this is Pilan Kurasayed, where we uncover the haunting stories of history's most infamous air disasters. Today, we revisit the Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision. On the evening of November 12, 1996, the skies above northern India stretched wide and calm. The sun had dipped low beyond the horizon, leaving behind the cool blue of twilight, and air traffic over New Delhi was steady but manageable. Indira Gandhi International Airport was accustomed to handling large volumes of traffic, both domestic and international, and this evening was no different. Among the aircraft that had been cleared for departure was Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763, a Boeing 747 bound for Dhahran carrying hundreds of passengers, families, workers, and travelers beginning what they believed would be an ordinary journey home. At nearly the same time, approaching from the west, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907, an Aviation Il-76 cargo and passenger aircraft, descended toward New Delhi, preparing for its landing sequence. Neither crew could have known that in the quiet skies of that November evening, their paths were fated to intersect in one of the deadliest collisions in aviation history. The Saudi Arabian 747 was massive, a wide-body jetliner known for its size and reliability, piloted by an experienced crew and carrying 312 people on board. The flight had only just left New Delhi, climbing into the night sky, engines humming as it ascended steadily. On the other side, the Kazakh aircraft was carrying 37 people. The Il-76 was a powerful Soviet-era design, robust and capable of handling both cargo and passenger operations. Its crew was also seasoned, though communication with Indian air traffic control was a challenge due to language barriers. As one aircraft rose and the other descended, their altitudes would become the critical factor that determined their fate. Air traffic control in New Delhi was handling both aircraft simultaneously. Controllers issued altitude assignments intended to keep the flights safely separated as they passed through the same sector of airspace. The Saudi 747 was cleared to climb to 14,000 feet, while the Kazakhstan flight was instructed to descend and maintain 15,000 feet until further clearance. On paper, this was a safe separation. The 1,000-foot vertical gap between the two jets should have ensured that they would pass one another without incident. But the skies are not just about machinery and instructions. They rely on human interpretation, trust in communication, and precise adherence to guidance. In this case, a slight miscommunication, compounded by difficulties in language and situational awareness, began to erode that safety margin. As the Kazakh crew descended, their interpretation of instructions became muddled. Instead of holding firmly at 15,000 feet as directed, they continued descending, perhaps believing that they were cleared lower, or perhaps due to confusion in translating altitude assignments. Meanwhile, the Saudi 747 was climbing steadily to its cleared altitude of 14,000 feet. In that brief window of time, their paths converge. The radar screens at air traffic control told a story that the human eye could not see. Two blips closing in on one another with startling speed, both massive machines carrying hundreds of lives, each moving closer without awareness of the other's exact position. In the cockpit of the Saudi aircraft, the crew monitored their climb, trusting that separation had been assured. At their altitude, visibility outside was limited, the horizon darkening as night approached. They would not have expected another aircraft to be descending into their flight path, especially with air traffic control actively guiding the airspace. In the Kazakh cockpit, the crew managed their descent, perhaps uncertain about their exact altitude or the clearance they had been given. Radio transmissions were not always crisp, and the nuances of English phrases used by controllers may not have been fully understood. Within seconds, the gap between them shrank. Above the rural expanse of Charkhi Dadri, a village area west of New Delhi, the two aircraft hurtled toward the same point in the sky. The Saudi jet climbing, the Kazakh jet descending. In those last moments before the collision, there was little either crew could do. Without modern collision avoidance systems that later became standard, they relied solely on instructions and visual contact. But the sky that evening offered no warning lights, no sudden awareness until it was too late. At nearly 14,000 feet, both aircraft entered the same slice of airspace, closing the final distance in a matter of seconds. The impact was catastrophic. The wing of the Kazakh Il-76 sliced through the Saudi Arabian 747, shearing it apart in mid-air. The enormous forces involved left both aircraft fatally damaged, tearing fuselages open and sending debris scattering across the sky. In an instant, hundreds of passengers and crew members were thrown into the chaos of a collision. No one could survive. Fire erupted as fuel ignited, turning fragments of the aircraft into falling fireballs that lit up the night. Witnesses on the ground below reported seeing streaks of flame raining from the heavens, a horrifying spectacle of destruction that unfolded in mere seconds. The Saudi jet, carrying over 300 people, disintegrated rapidly, breaking apart as it tumbled earthward. The Kazakh aircraft, though initially more intact, also lost control, plummeting to the ground with equal ferocity. The wreckage of both planes scattered across fields and villages, leaving behind twisted metal, scorched earth, and a trail of devastation that stretched for kilometers. Rescue efforts began almost immediately, but there were no lives left to save. The collision had claimed all 349 people on board both flights, making it the deadliest mid-air collision the world had ever seen. In the aftermath, investigators worked to piece together how such a disaster could occur in controlled airspace. The evidence pointed to miscommunication between the Kazakh crew and air traffic control, specifically in maintaining assigned altitude. The Kazakh aircraft had descended below its clearance, breaching the separation that was supposed to protect both flights. Contributing factors included limited English proficiency among the Kazakh crew, reliance on a single radio operator for translation, and the absence at that time of advanced onboard collision avoidance technology. These elements combined to create a perfect storm, where one misunderstanding became fatal. The tragedy of Charkhi Dadri was not just about two aircraft colliding, it was about the fragility of aviation safety when communication falters. The skies are vast, but aircraft move with such speed that even a small error can close the distance between life and death in seconds. This disaster underscored the importance of clear, standardized communication and the need for technological safeguards that go beyond human limitations. In the years that followed, the aviation industry responded. Mandatory installation of traffic collision avoidance systems, known as TCAS, became a global standard, ensuring that aircraft could warn one another directly of potential collisions. Independent of air traffic control, language proficiency requirements for pilots and controllers were also strengthened, reducing the chances that instructions could be misunderstood. For the families of those on board, however, these changes came too late. Communities across Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, India, and other nations grieved lives lost in a disaster that felt both sudden and preventable. The fields of Charkhi Dadri became a solemn reminder of the human cost of aviation errors. Even decades later, the memory of that night lingers, a case study in both tragedy and transformation. It serves as a reminder to every pilot, controller, and passenger that the systems in place today are built upon the lessons of disasters past, and that behind every safety regulation lies a story of lives that were lost. The Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision remains etched in history, not just for its scale, but for the clarity of its message. In aviation, precision is survival, and the margin for error is vanishingly small. The calm skies that evening concealed an invisible danger that grew silently until it erupted into catastrophe. From the ground, it may have seemed like two distant lights moving against the backdrop of night, until those lights converged and exploded into fire. From the cockpit, it was likely a moment of sudden horror, recognition dawning only at the instant of impact. And for the world, it was another painful lesson in the necessity of vigilance, communication, and unyielding commitment to safety. At precisely 14,000 feet above the quiet farmland of Charkhi Dadri, the invisible threads of fate pulled two aircraft together in the most devastating embrace the skies had ever seen. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763, a Boeing 747 carrying 312 souls, had only minutes earlier lifted from Indira Gandhi International Airport, bound for Dhahran with the promise of home and reunions. Across the same sky, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907, an Aviation Il-76 cargo aircraft with 37 people on board, descended toward the very airport the Saudi jet had left behind. On radar, they were just two moving blips, lines of data meant to be separated by the thin assurance of 1,000 feet. In reality, the gap was closing with terrifying speed. There was no time for second chances. As the Saudi jet reached its assigned altitude, the Kazakh aircraft dipped lower than it should have. A few hundred feet made the difference between near miss and annihilation. In a flash, the Kazakh jet's wing tore through the body of the Saudi 747. The sky lit up in a fiery bloom as two giant machines met head-on with unthinkable force. The sound of rending metal and exploding fuel echoed through the night sky. And what moments earlier had been two controlled flights now became showers of burning debris raining down over the fields and villages of Haryana. To those on the ground, it looked as though the heavens themselves had cracked open, unleashing fire and fragments across the darkened land. In the Saudi jet, the violence of the collision shattered the fuselage instantly. The plane, filled with families, workers, and travelers, broke apart before there was even a chance for a final call or warning. In the Kazakh aircraft, the cockpit and crew faced equal destruction, their engines and wings torn apart, their descent transforming into a spiral of flames. Within moments, both aircraft were no longer machines of travel but fragments of wreckage, their metal bodies twisting and burning as they plummeted toward the earth. No one on board either flight had the chance to survive. In less than 60 seconds, 349 people were gone. On the ground, villagers rushed toward the wreckage, drawn by the thunderous roar and the sight of the sky raining fire. Scattered across fields and groves were pieces of twisted metal, luggage ripped open, and fragments of lives cut short. The scale of devastation was overwhelming. Rescue crews arrived quickly, but they found only fire and silence. There were no survivors to pull from the wreckage, no voices calling for help. All that remained were flames consuming what was left of two aircraft that had crossed paths in the worst possible way. As dawn broke the next morning, the full scale of the tragedy became clear. Charred debris stretched across miles of farmland, smoke still rising from twisted sections of fuselage. Families gathered at airports and embassies in Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, India and beyond, desperate for news that would never bring relief. For investigators, the questions began immediately. How could two planes collide in controlled airspace, guided by professional controllers and experienced pilots? The answer lay in the fragile chain of communication that had failed at a critical moment. The Kazakh crew, tasked with following altitude instructions, descended below their clearance. Investigations revealed that language played a key role in the misunderstanding. Many of the Kazakh pilots had limited English proficiency, relying on one crew member to interpret and relay instructions. The stress of flying in unfamiliar airspace and the challenge of understanding rapid transmissions compounded the difficulty. In the crucial moments when clarity mattered most, the descent continued too far. At the same time, the Saudi jet climbed as cleared, its crew unaware that another aircraft was intruding into their airspace. With no modern traffic collision avoidance systems on board, both crews relied entirely on the words of air traffic control and their interpretation of those words. The tragedy struck not only India, but the global aviation community with equal force. It was not the first mid-air collision in history, but it was by far the deadliest. For India, it was a national trauma, unfolding just miles from the capital. For Saudi Arabia, it meant the loss of hundreds of citizens in what was meant to be a routine flight home. For Kazakhstan, it brought scrutiny to training standards, communication protocols, and international operations. But for the world at large, it was a wake-up call to a danger that still lurked in the skies, a reminder that even the most advanced machines were only as safe as the systems guiding them. Reform followed swiftly. One of the most important outcomes of Charkhi Dadri was the global enforcement of traffic collision avoidance systems, or TCAS, on commercial aircraft. These onboard systems gave aircraft the ability to detect one another independently of air traffic control, issuing direct warnings and instructions to pilots when a collision risk was imminent. Unlike the human voice over a radio, TCAS left no room for misinterpretation. If one aircraft needed to climb, it said so clearly, while instructing the other to descend. The technology acted as a failsafe, a second layer of security to prevent the nightmare that had unfolded in Indian skies. Language reforms also emerged as a vital lesson. English, already the standard language of aviation, was reinforced as a requirement with stricter proficiency standards for pilots and controllers alike. The ability to understand altitude assignments, clearances, and warnings in real time was recognized as non-negotiable. In the years after the collision, training programs worldwide emphasized not only technical skills, but also the clarity of communication. The voices in the cockpit, once reliant on partial translation, were trained to be fluent in the language of safety. For the families of the victims, reforms could not bring back what was lost. The scale of grief stretched across continents. Children, parents, workers, and entire families had vanished in an instant, their stories ending in the fiery skies above Charkhi Dadri. In Saudi Arabia, funerals filled cities and towns as communities mourned together. In Kazakhstan, the small number of passengers still represented enormous loss, and the shadow of blame added another layer of pain. In India, the villagers who witnessed the disaster carried the trauma of what they had seen, the memory of the sky raining fire forever etched into their minds. Even decades later, the name Charkhi Dadri is spoken with solemn weight in aviation circles. The incident is studied not just as a statistic, but as a human story of vulnerability. It reminds every pilot and controller that their actions are threads in a fragile web that must hold steady at all times. It reminds regulators and governments that safety is not a static achievement, but a constant pursuit. And it reminds the world that every lesson in aviation safety has been written in lives lost. The story of Charkhi Dadri does not end only in sorrow. It ends in transformation. Today, every time two aircraft approach one another in the sky, TCAS monitors their paths, ready to intervene if human error threatens to close the gap. Every time a pilot clears an altitude, the clarity of language is ensured by rigorous training that leaves less room for misunderstanding. These safeguards exist because of the lives lost in that mid-air collision. The price was unbearable, but the legacy is written in safer skies for the generations that followed. In the stillness of the fields where the wreckage once burned, the memory of that night endures. The people of Charkhi Dadri, who saw the fire fall from the heavens, remember not only the horror, but also the way the world changed after. The story remains a testament to the importance of vigilance and precision, to the fact that aviation safety is never guaranteed, but always earned. The deadliest mid-air collision in history became more than a tragedy. It became a turning point. A moment when the world vowed not to let the same chain of mistakes ever claim so many lives again. And so the skies, vast and indifferent, continue to hold the weight of that night in 1996. To fly is to trust in the lessons written in blood and fire, to know that the safety of millions each day rests on the knowledge carved from the tragedies of the past. For the 349 souls lost above Charkhi Dadri, the silence of their final moment speaks louder than any words. They are remembered in every aircraft that climbs and descends today, with the assurance of protection their flights never had. Their story is a reminder that behind every regulation, every safeguard, and every system, there are lives that once depended on what was not yet in place. This is the legacy of the Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision. It is a story of loss, but also a story of change, a reminder that the cost of safety is measured not in numbers but in human lives. The skies today are safer because of what was learned in that terrible moment. Yet the memory of those who perished ensures that the world will never forget how fragile that safety truly is.